while weaving her web of justice. It's Spider-Woman.
Hey everybody, this is Perch, and it feels like just a few short, innocent months ago we were talking about The Little Mermaid and the recasting and kind of the hubbub that was going on because they were doing a live-action version of the movie, and the character, instead of a waifish, abnormally thin, redheaded white girl who's pretty pale, of course lives under the water, so maybe that's to be expected, was recast as a black woman who admittedly has an incredible singing voice, and people were somehow shocked that people were shocked. So here we are a few months later, and granted this is going to get nowhere close to the same attention as that particular controversy, but we're gearing up to Across the Spider-Verse, and this is the follow-up to the first Miles Morales movie came out, which was a pretty big surprise hit. The animation style was unique, the story was solid, and it actually did a lot more to establish Miles Morales as a major character than the comic books have for many years. I like the movie. My kids like the movie. Everybody seemed to generally like that movie. And so they're doing a sequel. And in the sequel, of course, they're bringing more characters into the Spider-Verse. And one of those is Jessica Drew. So Jessica Drew is going to be voiced by Insecure star Issa Rae. And she's got a gassed up motorcycle and everything else. And she is introduced as Jessica Drew, who is being introduced along with Oscar Isaac's Spider-Man 2099 character, Miguel. Now, the Hollywood's approach is that the race of the voice needs to match the race of the character. In this case, Jessica Drew in the Across the Spider-Verse movie has been rendered as black. And people are, once again, surprised and expressing, not necessarily outrage. I mean, outrage is people getting really, really heated about it. The general consensus or the comments that come on is, that's not Jessica Drew. To which we're getting the somewhat predictable, but at this point, pretty exhausting response of, well, you're racist. So here's the problem with all that. Jessica Drew first appeared in 1977. And in the 70s, Jessica Drew looked a very specific way, and in many ways, I remember when Jessica Drew, through the years, showed up finally in Brian Michael Bendis' New Avengers, and what struck me was how much the character looked almost exactly the same. The costume had very little changes. She used to have a kind of a full face covering, then at some point, or I guess she first had the hair out, and then she had the face covering and then kind of had the hair out again. And anyway, but the character's costume was remarkably exactly the same for a long time. I do very much remember when she showed up in New Avengers, thinking that costume is super dated. Now they would go on to make a pretty awful looking costume a few years later, and then ultimately revert back to the classic. But my point is, in the 70s. 77 to be exact, she looked this way. And in the 80s, she looked the same way. And in the 90s, she looked the same way. And in 2000, she looked the same way. And then in 2010, she looked the same way, but was a scroll. And then 2015, everybody was looking at her ass. And then in 2020, she looked the same way. And even in 2022, this year, she looked the same way. And then suddenly the trailer drops and they say, hey, here's Jessica Drew making her, her big screen appearance Across the Spider-Verse, and she looks dramatically different. And people are like, hey, wait a minute, that's not Jessica Drew. The immediate response of, well, that's a racist comment, makes absolutely no sense. Because for 45 plus years, she's looked a very specific way, and people coming and going, hey, wait a minute, what happened? That's not the weirdest comment in the world. And come on now, at this point, we're all grown up enough and smart enough. This is all phony. We can all tell racism from non-racism. If people were posting and making comments like, I don't think black people should be in movies, or I don't see why there should be any black characters in the Spider-Verse, or this character is going to need to ride in the back of the spider bus, or this character shouldn't be allowed to whatever, eat or drink water in the same place as the other characters. That's racism. If they start throwing around the N-word, that's racism. It's pretty easy to detect. It's not that hard. Saying, hey, wait a minute, this character looks different. This doesn't look like the character I was expecting. And, I've known the character for 45 odd years, or maybe I've known the character for 10 years, but I've gone and looked at the back issues and I know this character has existed for 45 years and I can't help but notice this character looks dramatically different. That's not a racist statement. That's an obvious statement. Let's stop being disingenuous with each other. We can all tell when somebody's being racist versus somebody who's going, hey, I read the comics, they looked a certain way, you've changed it, I kind of wanted the movie to look like the comics I read. That's not too much to ask for. Now, they're not your movies, so of course people can do whatever the hell they want with it, but still, saying, I like the comic book that I read, I like the movie adaptation of the comic book I've read to, look like the comic book. Put it this way, a real easy way you could tell if this is racism or not is if they'd introduce this character, and instead of calling her Jessica Drew, they'd call her, Nancy Friday or whatever. If somebody's like, I don't like this character in the movie, why does this character have to be in the movie? That's going to lean more toward racism. That's the difference. If the character is just some OG character and people are still bitching, yeah, then you have a more compelling argument. But the pushback and you're seeing people go hard immediately out the gate, like you see for Laura Kinney is a real Wolverine, Miles Morales is a real Spider-Man, all this shit that keeps going on. It's just this incredibly disingenuous argument, and any pushback against that point of view, immediately, it's here comes the bigots, here come the racists. No, here come the people who have eyes and memory and remember what this character looks like. That's all. I mean, look, granted, there are definitely people out there who are saying, this movie's going to ruin my childhood. Those people are full of shit. It is not going to ruin your childhood. Jessica Drew is not a super popular character. I'm sure there's a few of you out there where she is your favorite character in the entire known universe, but not that many of you. If your argument is, this is my absolute favorite character, Marvel, you've killed off every bit of soul that I have left, I no longer have a reason to live, you're full of shit, okay? But conversely, saying, this is no big deal. I don't understand why anyone's mad. Come on. That's also disingenuous as hell. Somebody throwing an entire temper tantrum over this stuff, sure. That person's overreacting. But people are simply saying, no, that's not Jessica Drew. I've been reading Jessica Drew comics for forever. I picked up the Brindis's comic. I've seen this. I have several copies of the Monera cover in my bedroom. You saying this character now suddenly looks radically different. Now, for what it's worth, the costume looks kind of cool. The character looks cool. Issa Rae has a good voice. I mean, I guess, sure. It looks fine. The costume looks good. The design looks good. The movie looks good. It all looks good. I have no issues with any of this. The little baby May Parker looks cool. Spider-Punk looks cool. This movie stylistically, I think, will be pretty awesome. And including this Jessica Drew character looks great. Looks a little bit like Misty Knight with the afro, but looks and the motorcycle, but looks cool. Glad to see her. The only real contention here is you've named her and you've had her replace a character for 50 years. And by the way, where were there's a bunch of people pushing back like, why don't you just enjoy the art design and shut up? Why don't you just enjoy it for what it is? What's the big deal? Where were you people? Where was this argument when, the ancient one became, a Celtic kind of version in Doctor Strange? Where were all those people? Were these the same people who were screaming that Marvel had whitewashed a character and this was racism? Even weirder, where were you when there was an outrage over Iron Fist? Iron Fist Danny Rand from the Netflix series where they cast an actor who actually looked like the character in the comics. They did it accurately and people called it whitewashing because they forgot that The character was always white and looked this way because they just assumed a martial artist had to be Asian. That seems kind of racist to me, but what do I know? Where were those people then? Where were those people saying, just shut up and enjoy the art design? They were not there for that. This only goes one direction. And it's exhausting. Look, I'm looking forward to this movie. None of this changes any of that. And hey, again, character design looks cool. The only thing that's goofy about this is you've named her after an existing character that has 45 years of looking pretty much exactly the same, other than like a 2-year period where she had kind of a different look. And then I guess another year in there where she was pregnant. That's it. So, I like what you want. You could like the new version. You could like both versions. You could dislike it, whatever. Just spare us the phony outrage. And you do not need to play the racist card every damn time somebody pushes back on something. If you want to support this version, fine. Actually, do go buy a ticket. Because as these things came out, as we saw with Birds of Prey, as we've seen with several of these movies, when y'all get excited about pissing off the conservatives, you don't actually go and buy the ticket. So go buy the ticket this time. I think the movie will be great. It's worth supporting. The first one was decent, so let's see how this one does. Anyway, I just hate the phoniness. That's all. Just it's the phoniness that ticks me off. Thanks for listening.